Welcome, dear listeners. Today, you're about to experience a captivating detective story by none other than the legendary Agatha Christie. Titled The Apples of the Hesperides, this tale is brimming with mystery, danger, and a treasure hunt unlike any other. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. If you enjoy the suspense, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Let the journey begin. This story is part of Agatha Christie's famed The Labors of Hercules collection, where each tale draws from one of the 12 legendary tasks faced by Hercules. In The Apples of the Hesperides, Christie cleverly intertwines the myth of the golden apples guarded by a fearsome dragon with Hercule Poirot's quest to recover a stolen goblet, filled with its own history of treachery and bloodshed. Prepare yourself for an adventure of danger, deception, and a treasure that's been lost to time. The story mirrors the myth, but with a modern twist. Poirot must navigate a labyrinth of devious characters and treacherous obstacles to recover the goblet, a relic with a past as dark and bloody as the myth itself. Christie's brilliance shines as she weaves classical mythology into the fabric of her thrilling detective fiction, enriching the narrative with layers of meaning. Hercule Poirot, with his ever-observant eyes, studied the man sitting across from him, behind a grand mahogany desk. His gaze flicked over the man's sharp features, a broad forehead, a thin, calculating mouth, and a jawline that spoke of relentless ambition. It was clear to Poirot why Emery Power had amassed such vast wealth. But it was the delicate, almost elegant hands resting on the desk that caught his attention next. These hands had built not just an empire, but a legacy of fine art and history. Emery Power was not just a financier, he was a collector, known for his impeccable taste in art. His passion for beautiful objects went beyond mere aesthetics. He demanded that they carry a rich history with them. It was this obsession that led him to speak now in the quietest of tones, yet his voice carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. "You don't take many cases these days, Mr. Poirot," Power began, his voice steady, "but I believe you'll want to take this one." Poirot's sharp eyes narrowed. "Is it something of great importance?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Power leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "It's a matter of great importance to me," he replied. The goblet of power. Poirot's posture remained unchanged, but his mind was already processing every word. Power was no ordinary client, and his case was no ordinary puzzle. The object in question? A golden goblet dating back to the Renaissance, a piece of exquisite craftsmanship. It was said to have been used by Pope Alexander VI, a notorious figure from the Borgia dynasty. The goblet had a grim history. Those who had drunk from it had met untimely ends. "Quite a history," Poirot murmured under his breath, already intrigued. "A trail of bloodshed seems to follow it wherever it goes." Power nodded, the faintest trace of a smirk on his lips. "Indeed. The goblet's value is not just in its gold or design, it's in its past, in the dark stories it holds. I had to possess it, Mr. Poirot, and I paid dearly for it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with curiosity as Power continued. "The goblet was sold at auction by the Marchese di San Verratrino. I paid £30,000 for it, an extraordinary amount, I know. But when I want something, I don't hesitate to pay what it's worth." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A princely sum indeed, but I'm curious, Monsieur Power. Why would anyone part with such a treasure?" Power leaned back, his fingers steepled in thought. "Ah, but that's where the story takes a dark turn. The goblet was stolen before it reached me." The theft Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but his mind was whirling. "Stolen, you say? How did that happen?" Power sighed, clearly reluctant to relive the event. "The Marchese's palace was broken into on the night of the sale." A number of valuable items were taken, including the goblet. The police quickly identified the work of a notorious international gang of thieves, but the goblet, it was never recovered. "Was anyone caught?" Poirot asked, his voice as soft as ever. Power's eyes darkened. Two of the thieves, a Frenchman and an Italian, were arrested. They had stolen many things, but not the Borgia goblet. Only a few lesser pieces were found in their possession. Poirot continued. "And what of the third man, the Irishman?" Power's eyes narrowed. "Patrick Casey. He was the one who physically took the items, but he disappeared after the heist. 2 weeks later, he fell to his death while attempting another robbery in Paris. The goblet was never seen again." The mysterious goblet Poirot leaned forward, his voice sharp. "And this goblet has never surfaced, not in any auction, not on the black market?" Power shook his head. "Number. It's as if it vanished into thin air. The police have searched high and low, and I've employed private investigators myself, but it's as if the goblet has a will of its own." Poirot's gaze hardened. "And yet, you did not accept the Marchese's offer to refund your payment." Power smiled faintly. "No, Mr. Poirot, because if I had accepted, the goblet would have remained his. I want it back, and I will not let anyone stand in my way. The quest begins." Poirot's eyes twinkled as he stood. "Very well, Monsieur Power. It seems we have a mystery to solve." Poirot sat back, processing the information Emery Power was giving him. "So, the Borgia goblet, once a symbol of your rivalry with Sir Reuben Rosenthal, was never really in his hands?" Poirot asked, intrigued. Emery Power nodded with a slight smile. "Exactly. We had been business rivals for years, always trying to outdo each other even to the point of acquiring the same valuable items. The goblet wasn't just a treasure to us. It became a matter of pride, a symbol of who would come out on top. Both of us had agents bidding at the auction, determined not to let the other win." "And your agent, did he secure the goblet?" Poirot asked, his curiosity growing. "Not exactly," Power explained. "I took a precaution. I had a second agent there, acting as a representative of a Parisian dealer. Neither Sir Reuben nor I could afford to lose face, so having a third party buy the goblet seemed like the best solution. We'd be able to approach this third party later and quietly acquire it for ourselves." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "So, you orchestrated this?" "A little deception, you might say." "Exactly," Power said with a sly grin. "It worked perfectly, but I didn't expect Sir Reuben to find out so quickly. He must have realized he'd been tricked almost immediately." "But you didn't believe it would go that far?" Poirot asked. "That Sir Reuben would go to such lengths to get the goblet back?" Power shook his head. "No, not exactly. I assumed he'd buy a similar Renaissance goblet later, with no questions asked. The police would have kept it under wraps, and he would have quietly secured the treasure, hoping no one would notice." Poirot leaned in, analyzing. "So, you thought Sir Reuben would merely hide the goblet in plain sight, and perhaps later make it officially his?" "Yes," Power confirmed. "I thought that if I had taken the Marchese's offer and let Sir Reuben buy the cup privately, he'd eventually get it into his possession without any public fuss. But by keeping legal ownership, I thought I could still recover it if needed." Hercule Poirot, ever the meticulous detective, had been chasing the trail of the missing Borgia goblet for some time. The case, which began as a rivalry between two wealthy men, Emery Power and Sir Reuben Rosenthal, had taken many unexpected turns, leading Poirot to suspect there was more to the story than mere greed. Power had initially hired him to recover the goblet, but as Poirot delved deeper, he learned of the tangled web of deceit, mistaken beliefs, and concealed motives surrounding the artifact's disappearance. The goblet had been the subject of a fierce bidding war at an auction, where both men sought to outdo each other. Power had outsmarted Sir Reuben by employing a third-party agent, ensuring the goblet was legally his. Yet, in the end, the goblet had never ended up in Sir Reuben's hands. Instead, it seemed to have vanished into thin air, sparking a decade-long search. Power's suspicion had been that Sir Reuben, unable to bear the defeat, had masterminded the theft of the cup. However, the truth was much more complex. Through extensive investigation, Poirot learned that the goblet had not, in fact, ever been in Rosenthal's possession. Power's suspicion was wrong, and his pursuit had been in vain. The mystery seemed to lead nowhere until Poirot uncovered that the key to the goblet's disappearance might lie in the hands of a notorious thief, Casey, whose connections stretched across Europe. Poirot's investigation took him to various places across the world: America, Australia, Italy, France, and Turkey, as he followed clues left in Casey's wake. Along the way, Poirot met various shady characters: Red Kate, a former member of the criminal gang, Hugh Goyen, a slippery dealer, and others whose involvement seemed to grow more convoluted with each passing day. Poirot carefully collected information from these individuals, all while keeping his eyes on the ultimate goal, the recovery of the goblet. His search led him to the remote shores of Inishgowlan in the west of Ireland, where he had an epiphany. The isolation of the land, its haunting beauty, and its desolate landscape mirrored the mystery itself. Yet Poirot was undeterred. He believed that if the goblet was still out there, he would find it. One day, after much searching and introspection, Poirot arrived at the convent of St. Mary and All Angels. There, he sought out Sister Mary Ursula, the former Red Kate, now cloistered in religious life. Poirot had long suspected that the key to solving the mystery lay with her. His instincts had been correct. Sister Mary Ursula knew more than she had let on. Her role in the theft and the subsequent hiding of the goblet was central to the case. Through a combination of his skillful questioning and her own reluctant admissions, Poirot began to piece together the truth behind the goblet's disappearance. The story of the cup was not just about a stolen artifact, it was about betrayal, loyalty, and the lengths to which people would go to protect their secrets. The mystery, which had spanned years and continents, was nearing its end. As Poirot stood in the quiet chapel of the convent, he felt the satisfaction of knowing that the puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. The goblet would soon be found, and its journey from thief to collector to hidden treasure would be unraveled. With the case almost solved, Poirot could feel the warmth of victory on the horizon, a triumph not just of intellect, but of persistence. She has information that might be invaluable. The Mother Superior shook her head slowly, her face a serene mask, her voice calm but distant as if she were speaking from another realm. Sister Mary Ursula cannot help you. But I assure you, he started to argue, but his words were cut off by the resolute voice of the Mother Superior. Sister Mary Ursula died 2 months ago. In the saloon bar of Jimmy Donovan's hotel, Hercule Poirot sat, his back pressed uncomfortably against the wall. The hotel, which did not meet his exacting standards, was far from ideal. His bed was broken, and 2 window panes were shattered, letting in the cold night air, which Poirot deeply distrusted. The tepid hot water offered to him had done little to alleviate his discomfort, and the meal he had eaten was now causing strange and painful sensations in his stomach. The bar was filled with 5 men, each engaged in an intense discussion about politics, a topic that Hercule Poirot could barely follow, let alone care for. He sat there, lost in thought, when one man, sitting beside him, suddenly spoke. The man, unlike the others, had a certain dignity about him that set him apart. His face bore the unmistakable marks of a seedy townsman, someone who had seen too many difficult days. He leaned in, speaking with an air of authority. "I tell you, sir, I tell you, Pagin's pride hasn't got a chance, not a chance at all. It'll finish dead last on the course, mark my words. But you take my tip, you follow Atlas and you can't go wrong." Poirot regarded him with a strange reverence, his voice trembling as he replied, "Mon Dieu, it is an omen." Several hours later, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting its pale light on the ground. Poirot and his new companion, Atlas, had walked several miles, the former limping, clearly uncomfortable in his patent leather shoes. The thought crossed his mind. There were indeed other more appropriate shoes for country walking than his current ones. Atlas had even suggested a pair of brogues, but Poirot, ever the perfectionist, had declined the idea. Suddenly, Atlas stopped, looking uneasy as he muttered, "Is it the way the priest would be after me for this? I don't want a mortal sin on my conscience." Hercule Poirot, ever the wise counselor, replied with measured calm, "You are only restoring to Caesar the things which are Caesar's." The two men had come to the convent wall, and Atlas prepared to do his part. But as he did, a groan escaped him, and in a low, poignant voice he lamented that he was destroyed entirely. Poirot, speaking with his usual authority, reassured him, "Be quiet. It is not the weight of the world that you have to support, only the weight of Hercule Poirot." Atlas, shaking his head and turning over 2 5-pound notes, murmured with uncertainty, "Maybe I won't remember how I earned this in the morning. I'm worrying Father O'Reilly will be after me." Poirot, ever the optimist, said firmly, "Forget everything, my friend. Tomorrow the world is yours." Atlas continued to deliberate, asking if he should bet on horses like Working Lad or Sheila Boyne. But then, with sudden clarity, he paused and asked, "Did I hear you mention the name of a heathen god? Hercules, you said. There's a horse by that name running tomorrow." Poirot smiled, his voice firm with conviction. "My friend, place your money on Hercules. I tell you this, Hercules cannot fail." The next day, to everyone's shock, Mr. Rosslin's Hercules won the Boynan Stakes with 60-1 odds, just as Poirot had predicted. In the office of Emery Power, Poirot unveiled a beautifully wrapped parcel. With deliberate care, he unwrapped it, revealing a gleaming golden cup, chased with intricate details of a tree bearing emerald apples. "I congratulate you, Monsieur Poirot," Emery Power said, awe in his voice. Poirot nodded graciously. Emery Power reached out, running his finger around the rim of the cup, and murmured, "Mine." Poirot echoed, "Yours." After a brief pause, Power asked with curiosity, "Where did you find it?" Poirot replied, his tone matter of fact, "I found it on an altar." Casey's daughter was a nun, about to take her final vows when her father died. She was a devout, though ignorant girl. She took the cup to the convent, perhaps to atone for her father's sins. She gave it as a gift to be used in the glory of God. Emery Power, clearly intrigued, said, "An extraordinary story." Poirot continued, "Yes, but it was the fact that no one had ever tried to dispose of the cup that struck me. That suggested it was in a place where material values held no sway. And then I remembered Casey's daughter was a nun." Power, now fully engaged, asked, "Well, what made you think to look there?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps it was a process of elimination." Eventually, Power nodded and said, "Take the cup back to the convent in my name as a gift. And what do I get in exchange?" Poirot, in a serious tone, replied, "The nuns will say masses for your soul." Power smiled, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "So, after all, it may be an investment." perhaps the best one I ever made." In the convent's little parlor, Hercule Poirot returned the chalice to the Mother Superior, recounting the strange journey and the man who had come to possess it. "Tell him we thank him, and we will pray for him," Poirot said gently. "He needs your prayers." When asked if the man was unhappy, Poirot's answer was clear. So unhappy that he has forgotten what happiness means, so unhappy that he does not know he is unhappy. The Mother Superior sighed softly. Ah, a rich man. And Poirot, knowing that words were futile, remained silent.